You should be working with a very smart agency partner like Junglr, where they can say, hey, look at your branded traffic differently than your non-branded traffic. Because if you're not doing that, chances are somebody is making things look a whole lot nicer than they actually are for you.
Yeah, and it's good to have an idea of what, because conversions, hopefully, like if we have bad conversions on our branded traffic, like that's obviously an issue to pinpoint, which you would know if you were tracking them separately. So I really appreciate you calling out that point, because it's, I think, a really, really important one for brands to keep in mind when they're, again, defining their markets.
Things you can be doing to actually improve your market share. So you've gone through the steps of defining your market. How are you actually then going to grow there? The couple things that I have is, one, focus on wider market definitions. So again, if you're saying, I only want to focus on the things that matter, here are the top 3 search terms that are doing all of our volume, you are going to come into a time where maybe cost per clicks are significantly higher on those terms. And yeah, you may be doing technically a really good job of maximizing that space, but if you are neglecting the long tail, then you are not allowing your brand to actually grow. Wider market definitions, again, as long as they still carry intent, I think is really important. I would also call out to look at what are the soft things you can be doing beyond just, I am trying to improve my market share on clicks, so I am buying more ads. Okay, yeah, sure, that's one way of doing it. But can you also, if we're talking click-through rate, are there optimizations that you can be making to either just the locations, if you're advertising, say like, hey, actually, we just want to shift more of our ad dollars to top of search ads, or for the ad traffic that we already have, can we get a better click-through rate, going back to what we talked about before, by optimizing your primary image. Big one I use, since I like to look at purchase rates a lot, is what are the on-page activities that we can be doing that will just improve our cart close rate. So that ratio of total purchases per add to cart that we're getting, that tends to be a faster metric to analyze, because you're getting, again, a whole lot of data across a large number of individual search terms that you can account for the mix in there, as opposed to if you're just looking at your unit session percentage on a PDP, there's going to be a lot of mix that you can't actually account for if you're looking at it that way.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm here with Mike Frekey. He is the head of marketing ops at Perch, which if you do not know who Perch is, you should. They're amazing, and they have a lot of brands under house. And Mike, why I reached out to him about this particular topic, as I caught him on the Ad Badger podcast, sharing about market share, like how to track it, and a lot of very tactical advice, which we've been connected on LinkedIn for a while, and I think we'd had a chat or two, but I definitely reached out. I was like, okay, this is something that a lot of brands are talking about. A lot of brands want to be tracking market share. They're understanding that this is like a really big piece of trying to figure out if you're actually growing your brand on Amazon, but the tactics and how to do it, I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. So we should be able to shed a whole bunch of light on that topic today. So Mike, I really appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, absolutely, Elizabeth. One, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. The second Amazon released the brand analytics search query performance report, I just fell in love. And I knew we have first party data for kind of the first time here. So it's been a lot of fun just to try to see everything we can be doing.
Yeah, no, there's a lot we're going to get into in the tactics. I'd love for you just briefly, before we even get into this, share a little bit about you, kind of what you're working on at Perch, and maybe how you got into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everybody, Mike Frekey, head of marketing ops at Perch. I've been in the Amazon advertising space since 2016, so a very long time as far as Amazon goes. I started out in a digital marketing agency, working a bit in Amazon, a bit in Google, a bit in Facebook. I started to really cut my teeth in making Amazon my one true love, so to speak, and I made that my primary focus for the next 5 or so years. I ended up switching over to Perch to leave the agency side to go more in-house into the aggregator world. I've had a ton of fun in that. And now what I'm doing today is, on top of managing our advertising program, I am also managing our promotions, pricing, and forecasting processes as well, which has been a lot. It's been a big change, but it's been a really, really fun one. I know we were talking about the forecasting side of it in the pre-doc, though.
That's probably another conversation for another day, but I know forecasting is one of those other things, related to, kind of tracking market share. Everyone's like, oh, I want to know how to do it. It sounds like this amazing thing, but it sounds scary to a lot of people. people because there's a lot of variables. There's a whole lot of variables you got to take into account. So that's awesome. But yeah, on this topic of market share, I love that you had kind of come with sort of a way to maybe present this in a more systematic way, which I think is great. So I think in the beginning we were going to dive into what market share even is, because when it comes to talking about things, I think it's helpful to define it and not just like assume everyone knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, market share is a way for me to accurately represent my place in the market. You can use a handful of different KPIs depending on what you really want to show. I probably use the one I use the most is how am I capturing sales and demand in the market. So trying to use Amazon's first party data, see however I'm defining my specific market for that brand. What's the total number of sales that are happening? What amount of sales am I representing? And then can I track that is either maintaining or ideally growing? But I think we can also say, well, depending on what you're trying to do, the sales portion of it can be a very lagged indicator.
Yeah.
And so maybe you're saying more, what is my impression market share? What is my traffic market share? But it's all just a way for you to find a way to identify how are you comparing to your peers in the same space.
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. And I think it's a really important metric to track because oftentimes we get stuck in our own little box with isolation. I know some brands are like, oh, I want to grow this one product line. You know, you have like your specific revenue goals, but if that category is shrinking for whatever reason, then you're kind of fighting an uphill battle. Or I think it just lends a lot of context to the other metrics in your business. So instead of you just being your account in isolation, you're just saying, okay, what is the general context of my market that I'm standing in? And then how do I fit into that context and how am I relating to kind of what the market potential is, essentially?
That's right. Especially, again, having spent a fair amount of time going against COVID comps, there are times where the one that I will give the rosiest scenario of is if you're selling party supplies in 2022, you are seeing all of your sales going to the moon because people in 2020 and 2021, they weren't really hosting parties until they got the vaccine. And it's just, how can you figure out what exactly good looks like when everything is sending you a green indicator? That doesn't, just because things are green doesn't mean you're not leaving money on the table because you're not maximizing. Then the inverse is also true. If you're not hitting your revenue goals and the reason is because, oh, well, there was a war at the beginning of the year in 2022 and that had a series of different categories just, again, going to the moon. Luckily, there are no new wars right now. Unfortunately, for some of the businesses, maybe we're seeing some softness in demand, but good for the world, I'll say.
Yeah, no, definitely, for sure. And I love that quote you just said, like, what good looks like. That's a great quote. So I'd love to dig into a little bit more so we know, like, okay, so what is market share? But I think there's a lot of sellers who have heard of it and they're like, okay, I want to define this, but where to go and even get that data? Like, how do you even analyze it? What metrics are you looking at? How do I even begin to quantify this? Because as we'll probably discuss, like, there's more than one way to slice and dice this.
Yeah, this is an awesome question. I'm going to call out 3 locations, and within those locations, a few different metrics that you might play around with when you're looking there. One is for anybody who has either a really good agency partner or you're working directly with the Amazon API. There's the new, I think we just came out of beta on it, keyword impression share KPI. It's an interesting KPI in that you have a very at-scale way for all of your terms to know whether or not you are maintaining or growing on the, again, just how many eyeballs are there and are you capturing those eyeballs. The challenge within the API data itself is that, one, it's going to be keyword-based. It's not going to be query-based. So if you're running a lot of, one, automatic campaigns, you're not going to get any visibility whatsoever. And 2, if you're running a lot of broad match or phrase match, then you're going to have a series of different terms all bubbling up into there in which mix shift that you maybe can't account for could make the data a little bit messier for you. But then 2, the other side of that is it's capped at whatever your impression share is on that keyword in that campaign. So if you're like me and you have sort of like a harvesting type approach where you may have the same target in multiple campaigns because you're trying to then push traffic into a specific campaign for top of search versus rest of search you're maybe running through other campaigns. You're not actually getting your market share on the whole. You're only getting your share on that keyword in that specific campaign. But again, this is probably the single most at scale way for you to be pulling this data.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, APIs, like, you can pull those things at mass, downloading reports, clearing them, that's the whole thing. So then just to clarify, you're saying it's keyword impression share. It is not search term impression share. It's essentially a distinction.
Correct. Keyword impression share, not search term impression share. Which takes us to our next one, which actually is search term impression share. And that's if you're pulling directly from your search term report in the search term impression share report in Ad Console. This is one of my favorite reports, at least within Ad Console, because you can see both your your search impression share as well as your average rank. And that is actually going to be consolidated across every single time that that search term appears in any different campaign, any different ad group. So one like the sort of pros and cons to the strategy of looking at that data, you have a large number of overlapping ASINs. You will not know what your ASIN level search term impression share is, versus you can know that in the API-based strategy, because everything is going to be consolidated at your campaign. And so if you just have one product per campaign, then you know exactly what each individual ASIN is sharing at. In this case, everything is more shared. So if you're trying to do brand level share, then the ad console is going to be a lot more helpful for you.
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing to know. I know that's been kind of one of our issues as marketers for a long time, is like depending on how good your campaign structure is, that will essentially determine how clean your impression data is going to be, which was kind of interesting. Like when I went into, I want to say it's Walmart advertising, like they give you like search term product level data, and I'm like, could we get this in Amazon, please? But that's a whole nother conversation.
They will never.
Cool. That would be another question is, so it sounds like these are definitely advertising specific. Got it.
Yes.
So you're essentially saying like your advertising metrics, but would you say that if that's all you're tracking, that could potentially create issues because you're simply looking at ad coverage, maybe not necessarily total coverage from search pages?
Yes, I think that's a really great point, and that will take us to location number 3, which is brand analytics. I teased it at the beginning of the show. I love brand analytics. This is Amazon actually giving us first-party data that is not ad specific. We can actually get just the total landscape. And I know there are some widgets that aren't necessarily covered with it, but if you embrace the directionality of brand analytics, then there's going to be a lot of really helpful data in there. And so we can do the same sort of conversation we've been having about impression share as a way of tracking in just how many actual eyeballs can I get on my product versus how many am I actually getting on my product. I would actually push that once you get into brand analytics, it's probably even more helpful for you to be looking at your click share or your purchase share. That way you can say, again, I love purchase share. That's probably my favorite KPI to be checking, because I can start to see on each individual search term, where am I having an opportunity? I think is a nice way of saying it. There's an opportunity for me to be growing more relative to the other high intent terms that very much resonate with my products. I think click share can likely be a good starting ground to say, hey, there are question marks I have about even the traffic I am getting. Maybe start with trying to optimize around the get as much traffic as you possibly can. And then from there, pare down on the high intent traffic so that you can really do a, call it, more economical version.
I mean, that is a great point. So I know there's been a lot of talk, specifically around LinkedIn water cooler. I don't know other ecosystems if they're actually talking about it that much, but on click-through rate and click share and all of those metrics, which essentially drive traffic. So I mean, if you're looking at it from an ads perspective, I totally get it, because ads essentially drive traffic, and then it's up to the listing convert. I kind of push back on the whole, like, I don't like looking at one single metric as like the shining star of something that we need to optimize, because to my point, I was like, you can have an amazing click-through rate. If your conversion rate's 0, like, I could care less. It needs to have some sort of order value to it. So I love this look at, kind of like purchase rates and like, okay, so not only where are we getting traffic from, but where is that traffic converting essentially?
No, I think that's right. Even just on the click-through rate side, again, it can be a helpful metric if you're looking at it in the right way. Again, we'll keep this just in the context of maybe you really want to maximize your click share as a form of market share. Well, one way that you can be doing that, if you are trying to say, what's my click-through rate? Don't measure this as click-through rate relative to impressions, because Amazon is going to be loading 50 impressions every time someone conducts a search. If you have an impression at the bottom of the page, chances are that's not going to lead to a click. And if you are having on that same page 3 ads load there plus your organic, again, that's going to be sending you a really bad metric that says your click-through rate is awful, when in actuality, ideally, somebody is not control clicking on every single ad you have just to show a better click-through rate. It's a whole lot nicer if you say just how many clicks am I generating versus the total number of searches, because now you're comparing a sort of more apples to apples. There's no value in having somebody click multiple times on the same search.
Yeah, we're in the context of market share, which means we're kind of determining like what's our piece of the pie, essentially, is what we're trying to determine. Do you also in these evaluations, because I think that was the one thing when search query reports and brand analytics came out, everyone was like, like, oh my gosh, for the first time, I see how I stack up against not only how I'm doing, but how I'm doing versus my market, when that was something that a lot of people were clamoring for. And like, unfortunately, it was kind of like some black hat tactics out there that people were like, I want to find the information. I want to know how I'm doing versus my competition. So to your point of I could better, my listings or my click share or purchase rates and everything. Is that also something, I guess that would be kind of outside of market share, or do you even take that into account when looking at market share?
Anything where I'm able to compare myself to the full market, again, whether it's impressions, it's on the context of searches for clicks or on the context of searches for purchases, to me, that is all inclusive. As long as I have a first party, and that's the important thing, is a first party definition that I feel very comfortable with, I'm looking at all of that as market share.
Cool. No, I appreciate the context. It's super helpful. So we got through, what is that, 3 now, or is that 4? I know you said you had 6.
So it's 3 locations.
That's
so
right.
Ads API, the ad console itself, and then brand analytics. And then within brand analytics, there's the impression share, click share, and purchase share that we could all be looking at. I think the last view that I would be looking at, because while those are all locations, how can you be pulling things? It's also, I think, going to be helpful for people just to be thinking about, how am I defining my market? And so it doesn't matter if you're using I want to be comparing my purchases versus market purchases. I want to be comparing my clicks to market clicks. Well, if you don't have a good market definition through search terms, then what's the point anyway? I think a really cool way that you can use this is if you go into the Product Opportunity Explorer, and Elizabeth, you were the one who was pointing this out earlier in the call to me. But if you go into Product Opportunity Explorer, you can generate a list of niches, and then within each niche, I think it's something like 20 terms that Amazon views as high intent that leads to purchase. And I've gone through those at least to compare some of our top search products. Hey, how are we doing on these? I was disappointed when we only had top 3 performance on 90% of the related terms. There's still 2 terms we're not top 3 on. How dare we? But that's a really, really helpful way to just say, hey, what is Amazon saying is driving the sales? They will literally tell you that with these niches, as opposed to if you just want to use all of brand analytics, there's 1,000 terms that they deem you as relevant on a brand or an ASIN level. You do not want to be defining your market with all 1,000 terms.
Yeah. So just to, I think, so I can clarify to the audience, and from my understanding, when you're saying define the market, you're essentially saying what search terms do I believe are important to like the overall sales of my marketplace. So when we're saying define the market, it's almost like pick your terms to track yourself against, essentially.
You have that perfectly right. Yes. A concept that I've been running into a lot over the past couple, let's call it year and a half that we've had this now, year and a quarter, is we can actually see what a high intent term is just by comparing the market purchase rate to the total number of clicks or searches, where the way I always like to exemplify this is I think, average conversion rate on the market for a term like dog brush, something like 11 or 12%. The average conversion rate for a term like puppy supplies is 1.5%. Now, for Perch, we have the same products that we're advertising on both. But if one of these, not just on our product, but on any product that somebody could possibly be purchasing, they have a 6 to 7 times better conversion rate than on a more discovery level term. You would, at the very least, that is a bad term for you to be using to do a purchase level market share analysis, because, okay, you have top market share on a term that you're only converting on 1% of the time.
Yeah.
Does that actually help you? Are you actually feeling good about that? Versus an area that I'm assuming most people are converting around 10 to 20% on an average category.
Got it. So I assume in conjunction with this, so this is tracking market share. And again, kind of like what we said at the beginning of the call, it's almost adding context to like sales growth. So I assume you're also balancing this with like looking at sales growth. How are we doing on sales growth? And then, okay, depending on when those numbers are, we're also having this piece of context on the market share that, again, we're defining based on what we consider important search terms for our brand, and then kind of looking at how that is growing or shrinking and what piece do we have of that, essentially.
Yep, that's right.
Cool. Well, I know that was great on defining the market. Do you have any tips when it comes to helping people like define their market? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about like clicks and purchase intent and things. Do you have any other tips when it comes to making that list?
For making that list, the number one thing would be the Product Opportunity Explorer. The number 2 is so I think the default view in brand analytics is it has a rank of your top 25 terms. Chances are most of those are going to be pretty good, and you'll just want to comb through those. But I think if you're going to go through that lens, a really helpful thing is what I've found to be helpful at the very least is you make two lists. One is your list of branded intent terms, the areas that, yeah, chances are you're going to have a very, whatever KPI you're going after, it's impressions, it's clicks, it's purchases. If you are selling a brand like Hertzgo and someone is typing in the name Hertzgo, I'm going to expect that you win that conversion. Versus if you are selling on the term dog brush, that is a much more strategic term that you want to be measuring the changes to. And I'll be honest with you, I care about the changes in both, but what I don't want to be looking at is one market definition in which the mix, where I have slightly more branded traffic or slightly less branded traffic, is now sending me the wrong signal about what my market share is actually doing.
Now that is an insanely good point, because I mean, for instance, like your brand that you have like very good brand recognition, if that brand recognition grows, that's going to give signals that like, oh, the market's growing, when it could just be that your brand recognition is growing. So like you said, like not skewing data, which is a very common thing we often talk about in the advertising world. It's like, hey, don't mix branded terms with non-branded terms, because you're going to look at the campaign and be like, oh my gosh, look at the ACOS, aren't I phenomenal, haven't I done great? And you're like, well, no, it's one of your branded terms that got in there, and all of a sudden you think you're doing great when in all actuality maybe it's not as rosy as you thought. So it's essentially like trying to look at context again.
Exactly. And I feel like that is the number one thing for anybody who, if you're owning your own business or you are working with an agency partner, you should be working with a very smart agency partner like Junglr, where they can say, hey, look at your branded traffic differently than your non-branded traffic, because if you're not doing that, chances are somebody is making things look a whole lot nicer than they actually are for you.
Yeah, and it's good to have an idea of what, because conversions, hopefully, like if we have bad conversions on our branded traffic, like that's obviously an issue to pinpoint, which you would know if you were tracking them separately. So I really appreciate you calling out that point, because it's, I think, a really, really important one for brands to keep in mind when they're, again, defining their markets. So, I mean, this has been an insanely great conversation. I really, really appreciate you jumping on. Is there anything else that we neglected to mention in this conversation that we should have?
Yeah, I think I'd love to end things for people just with a couple of things you can be doing, tactics you can be doing to actually improve your market share. So you've gone through the steps of defining your market. How are you actually then going to grow there? The couple of things that I have is, one, focus on wider market definition. So again, if you're saying, I only want to focus on the things that matter, here are the top 3 search terms that are doing all of our volume. You are going to come into a time where maybe cost per clicks are significantly higher on those terms. And yeah, you may be doing technically a really good job of maximizing that space, but if you are neglecting the long tail, then you are not allowing your brand to actually grow. Wider market definitions, again, as long as they still carry intent, I think is really important. I would also call out to look at what are the soft things you can be doing beyond just, I am trying to improve my market share on clicks, so I am buying more ads. Okay, yeah, sure, that's one way of doing it. But can you also, if we're talking click-through rate, are there optimizations that you can be making to either just the locations, if you're advertising, say like, hey, actually, we just want to shift more of our ad dollars to top of search ads, or for the ad traffic that we already have, can we get a better click-through rate, going back to what we talked about before, by optimizing your primary image. Big one I use, since I like to look at purchase rates a lot, is what are the on-page activities that we can be doing that will just improve our cart close rate. So that ratio of total purchases per add to cart that we're getting, that tends to be a faster metric to analyze, because you're getting, again, a whole lot of data across a large number of individual search terms that you can account for the mix in there, as opposed to if you're just looking at your unit session percentage on a PDP, there's going to be a lot of mix that you can't actually account for if you're looking at it that way.
That's it. Yeah, that's a really great point. I appreciate you adding in the tactics there, which you told me about and I neglected to mention. So I appreciate you adding in that context. So this has been awesome. If someone wanted to learn more from you, you're the most active on LinkedIn, or is there anyone else they should go to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, at Mike Frekey. Is it ats on LinkedIn? I'm not even sure. But
I don't know. We'll put it in the link in the description, so we'll make sure that they can go and find you. So definitely go follow Mike there. He's a lot of good things to share all around market share and everything else that he's doing.
Thank you so much.